A couple of months ago, we were talking about programming, content that we could deliver to promising young companies, and the discussion went to what's it like to be a CEO. And I will share with you what my experience was as a CEO. I'm not CEO any longer. I'm still a CEO, so he can talk firsthand. I got CEOing business. I ran an engineering company for 25 years, worked for a big engineering company for 10 years, and realized that I really had the entrepreneur that I needed to scratch. And there was just never any question that I wanted to be the CEO, and I was gonna be the CEO. That's not true for everybody. And I've learned that there are times when people think that maybe I'm not the CEO. Maybe someone would be better as a CEO and if I were the CTO. So we put together the idea that it would be good to have a discussion along the lines of what's it like being a CEO? How can I be a better CEO? Or if I realize that I'm really not the CEO, or even more, my board of directors tells me that I'm not the CEO, how do we put a CEO in that I'm going to be happy? Everybody sitting here has this idea, right? It's your baby, it's your intellectual child, and you want that to grow up into a sustainable business. So how do I go about that, recognizing that somebody's got to be at the top, somebody has to be the CEO? So we began assembling content ideas, and let's jump into it. I mean, we have an intro discussion where I'm going to try and establish my credibility as an innovator, an entrepreneur, and we'll go to really what the origin is of a CEO. Where does a CEO from? Why is it that we have to have a CEO? We'll get into a little bit about authority, the different kinds of authority, and what a CEO needs to have in terms of authority to be able to do his or her job. And then we'll talk about how you build a team. What's the organization development plan? How do I need to think about that? Frameworks of thinking. Everybody in here, if I haven't worked with you, you probably have already worked with a business model canvas. The BMC is a framework for thinking. It isn't anything hard and fast. It really is just a starting point to your strategic plan, but it's a way for you to accumulate your thinking, your data into a method, understanding what the pieces are and how they relate, and how you can ultimately make decisions day to day. So we'll talk a little bit about the business model canvas. We'll talk about a different business model called the S's. That's a McKinsey, Harvard Business School kind of thought model for your business. We'll get into some of the details of one of the S's. And why, in my opinion, and I'd love to have debate, why one of the S's is more important than all the others. We'll then take a look at how you think about the CEO position, whether you're in it or somebody else is in it. And then we're going to talk about, okay, if I want to be the CEO or I want to pick a CEO, what are the characteristics that I really need to emphasize? What are the characteristics of a great CEO? And yeah, I mean, you can go to Google or Amazon and find information. I've been collecting books like that for 30 years. And they're good. There's some great ones out there. And I even would recommend some. But you really have to be able to have the framework in your head of where I personally am and where is my company? How do I apply this stuff? You know, it's great when you talk about Jack Welch, and when he stepped into GE, they had 350 businesses and he got rid of 345 of them or something. I mean, it's crazy. And his simple value was, if we can't be first or second in the world in that market, we're not going to do it. Well, that's great. Doesn't apply to me, right? It maybe helped me focus a little bit, but I'm not a, $80 billion a year company. I'm pre-revenue. So we want to talk a little bit about what those differences are. And then if you actually take the leap of, I know I don't want to be the CEO, I want to hire a CEO, where do I look? How do I find one? And what's that conversation like? Like when I identify somebody who I want to consider, call them up or I shoot them a message on LinkedIn. What's my first conversation? What's that need to be? Okay, and then we'll wrap up the morning session. We'll have our keynote speaker, Angelique Adams, who will talk with us about CEOing and innovation. So she is a internationally recognized thought leader in innovation. And what a cool room to be able to talk about innovation. So we'll talk about innovation for a little while. We'll break for lunch. And then we will have our panel session. We're going to start that at 1 o'clock. I think the original agenda invitation had us starting at 1:30. We're going to start a little earlier, start at 1 o'clock, and then run for an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on questions and discussion. And so that's what the day looks like. Okay? Anything else we want to talk about? It's actually there's a lot here. So we're really not trying to any one subject in a lot of depth. We want to offer you ideas that if they strike you as valuable, that you dig into them more, by all means do it. I bring the 7 S's model as an example about that. We talked in our planning discussion about the 7 S's. I mean, S's. My guess is Harvard has one. When I learned it, it took a week. So it's really not fair for me to suggest that I can deliver that and you can absorb it in a matter of 20 minutes. So 7 S's that would be used. Dig into it more. If you Google 7 S's, template that you can start with. If you want to know more from me or any of the other folks that are up here today, reach out and ask. I don't think I understand how these two things work together. Describe it to me in the context of my company. So that's what we want to do, is we want to give frameworks, help you understand and we'll provide some kind of a basis for moving forward, for developing your own companies. Here today with 1 or 2 or 3 good ideas, I think that's great. I would hope I can deliver more than 1 or 2 or 3, but we'll see. Okay, good. Yes.
Any slide content, will we get copies of that later?
We will get you copies and we'll get you links to the video. Not sure what platform. Yeah, yes. Okay, this is how I want to later. 1963 old. I wrote a letter to Squibb, and I don't know if you can read that. But Bristol Myers Squibb had a little office in Cincinnati, and my dad told me that they made pharmaceuticals and healthcare items like toothbrushes. So I wrote him a letter. And I said, "Dear sir, I have an idea about a misspelled brush, toothbrush. This is how it works. You press holes in the brush and toothpaste comes out." And I drew a picture. And I gave him my address. So that was my innovation. And I'm extraordinarily proud of that. But what proved I'm an entrepreneur, the bottom I said, P.S. My idea works out, how much money will I get? So I showed that at 9 years old, I truly was an entrepreneur.
Well, somebody stole your idea. I saw an ad for that 3 days ago.
I wasn't quick enough to the patent office. There's a lesson there, right?
This is like the idea.
Okay. So I truly am an engineer. I'm a founder. I have founded several companies and organizations, including proud to be a co-founder with Brandon of Startup Docs. I'm an angel investor and have invested in funds and in individual companies, and I have lots of success stories and some painful stories to share if anybody wants to listen, but usually not, which is awesome. But I have to say I'm not a lawyer. So I'm going to talk about some things today that I probably should have a lawyer up here talking about. Brandon's a lawyer. Maybe he can help me. But I'm not a lawyer. You may ask me a question that I may need to duck, and I hope that you. I was chairman and president. So keep in mind, I was never the CEO. And someone may ask, several people did while I was running my engineering company, why aren't you the CEO? And I thought president was all I needed to be. And as it turned out, in my position in that company, that's all I needed to be. Didn't need a CEO. So I'm throwing that out as one of the first ideas that when we talk about CEOing, when we talk about the origin, how CEOs behave, you can start and design pretty much anything you want. You have to take care. You have to take care of the board of directors and your customers and your employees and your strategic partners. You got to do all that. But what your title is, where you sit in the organization is up to you as you design your organization and as you name key people. And so most of the principles that we're going to cover today you're the CEO. You're always going to be the CEO. You know that. We'll talk to a startup, early stage company this afternoon, Megan O'Connor with Ncycle. She's known she wanted to be the CEO since she was probably 10 years old. I think that's kind of a gift. It sort of helps you as you move along. But like I said, that's not everybody's jam, right? I mean, that's not the way everybody thinks. Whether you're the founder, you're the innovator, the entrepreneur, and the founder, and you know you don't want to be the CEO, and you're going to hire one. Or you may be considering the CEO-ship of even another company. So think about your company, you're the CEO, you're doing really well, you're growing, and an investor comes in and says, hey, we'd like for you to acquire this other startup company and bring it in, merge it with yours, and we want you to be the CEO of the combined company. What's that mean? Think about that. That's a big deal. I've done that, and I'll tell you, I've done it twice. One time it worked and one time it failed. It went down in flames. So, and I wish I know today what I wish I knew then what I know today, because I could have avoided it. Okay, so we talked about the last point there. So what's the difference between being a CEO or hiring one? To be sort of expected to role. You've got the idea, you've got the cool technology, you invented it. Now you have to lead all of the other pieces of the business in order to commercialize that technology successfully. And as that innovator, entrepreneur, and founder, remember, so you have to always maintain some semblance of position, your position on the cap table, whether that's through how your shares are structured. Certain may be voting, certain may be not. Certain classes of share may have priority to seats. So in my real life, not current, but in my real life, I had an engineering company, and we had talked about starting a new company, an engineering company, and our business plan sat in my desk drawer for 7 years. 7 years. And I continued eyes in the big engineering company. I found a partner. We won we were a 50-person company, the $8 million contract, and it kind of turned us on our head. We weren't really sure what do we do now? It's like, well, Bruck won it, let him run it. Like, wait, I'm not a contract manager. I just happen to be the proposal manager. I actually captured this work. Now I need you guys to help me run. And it caused this big thing, and that led to, we got acquired. Somebody came along. And the management got into an ethics situation. I mean, it wasn't a graceful exit. It was I discovered it, and I went into the CEO's office and confirmed what had happened. I said, I'm done. And home, and I never went back. And it just killed me. I had to leave behind. But ethics is that, and I left. And my head came over to my house, and they said, you probably didn't have a very restful night. And I said, oh, I had the most restful night I've had in a long time. I feel great. What's going on? And they said, we're ready to go. Let's start. And we did. And I said, there's one condition. Bruck gets 51% of the stock, period. And that stock votes for another 29.5% share, or 24% that you vote for the board of directors. So I controlled all of the stock, all of the voted stock. I controlled 51%. And I said that, I mean, if your stock changes changes, that's fine, but my stock will never change. So we talked about that for about 10 minutes. And I said, that's the condition. That's all, that's the only way we're going to do it. And we did. And I knew that I had control forever. And when we sold the company, and 25 years later, 2013, I owned 51% of the company. And when you have a vote that's like liquidating the company, it's called change of control. You actually have to have all the shares vote. But I still had 51% of the shares. So from the very beginning to the very end, and you can say that's ego or insecurity or whatever you want at the time, and I still today think that was smart. That's the way I wanted to do it, Mitch.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask why decided was there, like there wasn't a lack of trust necessarily with your partners, or was it that, or felt like there needed?
If you asked me on that day, I would have said that I trusted my two co-founders completely. As it turned out, not so much. So all I'm suggesting, one of the more important, perhaps the most important thing to do as the innovator, entrepreneur, founder, CEO, think about what you're going to grow up to be, and think about how you're going to manage control, and make sure that you build that in each step of the way. So when you build an option pool, right? Or when you build your board of directors, or when you build your C-suite as you start to get big, you got to think about all that stuff.
The things I feel like I've learned over time is that I'm not always the smartest person in the room, and that other people have good ideas. That's why I've sort of approached the control question a little bit more of willingness to give up some level of control as long as I think the right mind is coming. Just curious your thoughts on that.
I think that you can motivate, you can inspire people to follow you. And we want to talk a little bit about that. What's leadership? But I think that you can get, and trust me, I'm real feeling that I'm absolutely not the smartest, especially when I walk in a room like this. It's how do you establish yourself as the leader with control? I would argue that you don't have to give up control in order to establish a leadership position. You got, I mean, back in my world, and as we begin to experience generational, and even since I've left the CEO spot, there's been another generation that started to impact the total labor base, the employees across the country. Being able to make companies seem like it was a democracy and no, but it wasn't, is you have to take a lot of consideration, but you don't.
So as the dumbest but oldest person in the room, is that, I'm curious, what Mitch was asking you and what you were saying, how does that play through generational and expectations of Gen X, Y, Z, et cetera? Do you think that part of the way people more our age think is different?
We can spend a lot of time on that point, but it's a great point. I mean, you go from that was my role and I followed in his footsteps, and I mean, he not only wore a suit to work every day, not just a coat and pants, but I mean, they matched. His back was the chair all day. And he expected, and he worked at Procter and Gamble, and he expected that his Procter stock was going to go up to the point where it doubled every 7 years, and he was going to, have $1 million when he. That kind of work ethic really doesn't exist anymore. And when I carried that, I wore a tie. PYA, you folks wear ties.
COVID has had an impact.
But I mean, the point wasn't to show off yourself. The point was to demonstrate respect for coworkers, your profession, the people you were meeting with. So I wore a tie until probably 2010, and I was told by several of my executives that I intimidated people. Stop doing that. So there's a different world out there. I thought everybody wanted upward mobility. I thought everybody wanted to have loftier responsibilities and goals and be paid more. Not true. I want more time off. I want to spend time with my kids. I'm a dad, and I want to take 2 months off when we have a baby. It's like, what? So it's a new world, and I got to say that I didn't do very well adapting to those new rules later in my career, and I wish I would have done a better job of that. Well, I think the answer to that may be pretty obvious, right? I mean, you have to show more patience and understanding. You have to articulate in more positive ways. You have to be more inspiring as opposed to demanding. So lots of different things that you can begin to think about and apply as you grow. But you're right. Being demanding and arrogant will chase people away. Okay, so how do you need to fail on this later? Hi, Bailey. So this is Bailey Foster. She's the founder of Real Good Kitchen. And you are the president or the CEO or? You sign the checks. Yep. I embarrassed you. I embarrassed you like that because people went around the room and introduced themselves, and I wanted it. Not really. Not really. You're a founder. I think one of the most important things is when you're looking at CEO-ship your company, figure out how am I going to evolve this thing over time, and what are going to be the ingredients, and what's the recipe to success look like relative to my own role. I think the single most important thing is you got to really and sometimes that's not very easy. Hisham, you raised, how do I not be arrogant? How do I not be demanding? Sometimes when things are going not real well and you're tired, that may be the way you come across. But the next morning, it's time to go in and smooth things over. Administrative assistant. I had the same administrative assistant for 25 years. I have no idea why she didn't leave. She sure should have, but I sure apologized to her because there were times when I just lost my temper, and that's human. In the interest, figure out what you're good at. Figure out what you're not very good at. and make sure that you're building an organization that shores up those areas of weakness. Whether I choose one, what's one thing that shouldn't change? I close all of my talks to early stage companies with this one idea. If you don't do anything else, create or build value, you have to always, at the end of, every day, can understand how you added value. So think about that in the context of the CEO role. Oh, if I step out and I bring somebody in, is that adding value? Well, if it doesn't, don't do it. So if I ever got a tattoo, it might be build value, create value. I don't think I will. If.
Let me make sure my microphone's on. When are you going to get the build value tattoo, John?
Right after the other tattoo that I promised to get also was Sean Carson's opening line in his PhD dissertation. Entrepreneurship is hard. Okay. Here's one model of innovation on and for there's a little light bulb. I think you can see the little light bulb in the center. There's an idea. I would define innovation as with an action plan wrapped around it. Okay? So I have an idea. This is what I'm going to do with it. Entrepreneurship is when you take the innovation and you wrap a business model around it. Innovator, and you may not be the entrepreneur. You need to have a co-founder who understands the business well enough to help you build the business model. There's where a co-founder comes from. And then there's corporate formation, and there's lots of different corporate formations. But that's what I mean when I say innovation or innovator, entrepreneur, and founder. And I have said before, and I'll say again, I'm a bit of a founder snob. I like people who have kind of chucked a previous profession or a regular paycheck, or even taken a big chunk of their personal savings and pushed it in kind of Texas Hold'em style and all in on a company. Because it's kind of like jumping out of an airplane. You know, you're free fall for a little while where you really don't. But chute will open. Mine did. And it's pretty scary until it does. And going back to my very original comment about the community support here in Knoxville, that's what that community support really does. Is it helps more confident, and it helps you to open your structures. LLCs, S Corps, C Corps, B Corps. Not going to go into a lot of those, but you might want to consider that. I think most of you have already formed, which is great. And I learn something new every day about them. So they're complicated. Don even taught me this week that an LLC can be taxed as a C Corp. Pretty cool. Comes in handy. There's a lot to learn, and we're not going to on it. We can a little bit about but structure it is for comes from the state. The state tells you what the requirements are for your new business entity. It's not federal, it's not county, state. There may local ordinances or tax state statute also. So I have a couple of Ohio I wish I could tell you why Tennessee seems so difficult. Maybe I just need to spend more time with it, but it does. It seems to be difficult. There are certain requirements. So LLCs have holders typically, they have members. There are articles of in all of the, but then there's an operating agreement for LLC, and there is a manager and not a president. And typically there is earnings path. The company doesn't pay tax. Residual members pay big of earnings there are. And there's an annual report. That's one of the reasons why. You got to keep issuing annual reports, and they charge you. B's and C's, there are shareholders, articles of incorporation, there's a board of directors. There are elected officers, so the board elects the officers. Shareholders elect the board elects the officers. And earnings are retained, so earnings are not passed through to the shareholders. Earnings are taxed at the corporate level. So right now, well, under the Trump tax arrangements of 2017, corporate tax got lowered to 20-something%. And now we're talking about having those bump up to something higher, like 35 or 39%, something like that. So as a founder, and you begin to structure your company and get the state documents in place to form your legal entity, that, by the way, is shorthand. The term there is papered. Is your company papered? That means, do you have the state documents in place, and does it have legal standing? You need to think about what you're going to do, not only as the founder, but as the CEO, so that you're acting on the best interest of the company and you're acting on the best interest of yourself. And I already gave you my example. My example was how I set up my engineering company. So here is a section of information. So the power to form a corporation comes from the state. And in this particular example, member equals board of directors, because this is an LLC. This is actually one of my LLCs in Tennessee. So think about member as a board of directors. So the officers of the company shall be the president and the secretary, each of whom shall be elected by the board of directors. The board of directors may also elect a treasurer and such other officers as the member may deem necessary. So one of the interesting things about the way you can form your company is that the president, secretary, and treasurer can all be the same person. That's weird, isn't it? I think it is. Or you can have one person holding two of the spots and a second person holding one spot. The pleasure of the board of directors. Isn't that great? So the board of directors, if you're the CEO and you don't control the board of directors, the board of directors can take you out anytime. Keep that in mind. So if you're the CEO, you serve at the pleasure of the board of directors. And what that means is the board of directors can fire you whenever they want, really for any reason or no reason at all. So if you're the founder of the company, it goes back to that control point that I was making. If you're the founder of the company, make sure that you control the board so that you don't ever get fired. Again, that's maybe my own insecurity. I don't know.
No, actually, I've heard stories like that, and I was always confused about it, but now it starts making sense. So as a founder, I can be fired. They tell me, sit on the side, we'll run the show. We'll give you your dividend at the end of the year if I don't maintain control, right?
Right. Well, one of the things that I also in my share agreement, separate agreement that may run parallel to your corporate formations agreement, but you have a shareholders agreement, and in the shareholders agreement it says it's illegal for you to hold shares if you're not an employee. The shares any longer, so you don't get the dividends. So they have to pay you according to some formula that's probably in the shareholders agreement, but it gets to be a complicated circumstance. What each means, but how to relate to each other. Any officer, including CEO, can also leave. You can quit. Odds are you're not gonna, but you may want to. President shall be principal executive officer of the company and shall supervise and control all of the business and affairs of the company. Bingo. That's what I'm looking for. Where does my responsibility as CEO come from? It comes from the board of directors. The board of directors is formed as a matter of state law. So the board of directors discharge responsibility to the and CEO the authority. I want to come back to that in a minute, but you are, as CEO, you are delegated the responsibility and the authority for conducting all of the company. Okay, that's where that comes from. That's why you're responsible. So, unfortunately, understand that so that you can visualize the worst case. And also, equally unfortunately, I'm telling you this because of the experience that I've had, and that is, how do I explain this to a judge? Somebody's going to sue me under state law, and how do I explain this to the judge? So if you don't understand it, it's and responsible. Okay, so who are the key stakeholders in a company? And how do you think about the board of directors and the officers that they elect? Is that working? Yep. Thank you. So at varying levels, an officer is an executive that has the authority to act on behalf of the corporation and responsibility for some portion of day-to-day responsibilities. Well, where does that get from? That can be defined in a couple of different places. if I'm the chairman of the board or if I'm the CEO, I know that I am the CEO, that I'm responsible for everything. But what if I want to bring in a chief financial officer? Or what if I want to bring in executive vice president of operations? How do I give them elements of responsibility and authority that I want them to have without just saying you're responsible for everything? Well, typically that's done, it can be done in an employment contract, or it can be done in a job description that's made part of their employment arrangements with the company. And the job description needs to be, I would, as the CEO or as the board chair, I would want the board to recognize and make sure that that information was in their file. So I would want to know if, for example, the chief financial officer had check writing authority, or maybe the CFO has check writing authority up to $5,000. So things start to get fairly detailed, fairly granular as the company, as you build out the organization and as the company grows. There's usually a minimum, and we talked about what Tennessee's looking for in an LLC. They want 2 and possibly 3. They want a president, a secretary, and possibly a treasurer. There's no maximum number of officers. I used to tease banks because banks had so many vice presidents. I mean, there's millions of vice presidents. And I'm not sure why. I guess it's because it means they can sign contracts. So an officer of the company can conduct business on behalf of the company. That's really important to remember. So what are the different kinds of officers? The CEO, the visionary, superior to all other officers in the company, and is first in command. Use a bit of a military analogy. That's the person who is the one who calls all the shots, unless that particular shot is delegated. And there are lots as you grow and as you figure out what you're good at and what you want to focus on. And you've delegated other responsibilities and authority, what it is that you are going to be directly responsible for, or what you're going to have one of your reports be responsible for. Can I trade you now? So the 2 words at the bottom of that slide, that's where the rubber meets the road with everybody. All the officers and all the directors have, and those have legal precedent. So care and loyalty, bottom line, what you are responsible for. Care and loyalty of whom? What? Well, all the assets of the company, its competitive position, all the employees of the company, most importantly, the shareholders of the company. So we've talked a little bit about authority and responsibility and how the state governs the way a board of directors is formed and what its responsibilities are. And how it delegates authority and responsibility to officers of the company. That's what I refer to as delegated authority. Okay, so Tom and the folks here at the research park have, and I truly am honored to be invited to be the director of the Spark Innovation Center. So that means I have more responsibility, right? I better figure out what that means, huh? I mean, so I'm putting that out there with the idea that I truly do know what my responsibilities are. I understand what I'm responsible for and what my authority is. But it really doesn't mean much. And the reason why I say that is because I think the most important form of authority is what is referred to as consent authority. And consent authority doesn't come necessarily from those who have been delegated authority from on high. Consent authority is earned. Consent authority is the willingness of the people in your organizations to follow you. Can you inspire and convince a group of people that work for you to do what they might not otherwise themselves? Okay, and that's not necessarily who have. That's the person that a group of people is willing to follow. Do it every day. I mean, it truly is impressive to see that there's a group of people in a room who listen and follow to another single person. Now, it's interesting as a CEO to understand that and to begin to demonstrate that behavior yourself. But it's also important and how to build that same ability, that same kind of leadership in others, I think is absolutely critical to you growing your organization to where you want to be. The primary reason that you're going to grow your organization is A, you've got a great product that the market loves, and you can't build enough to satisfy the demand. And at the end of the day, you can't do everything. So how do I think about that? Well, I better get some really good people here, and I better figure out how to lead. Just because I happen to be the founder or the CEO that's been named by the board. I have to convince them that I'm worth following. Okay? So think about the differences between delegated authority and consent authority. And if I were going to put my chips on somebody to be an up and rising star in my organization, it would be the person who shows the strongest ability in being able to manage according to consent authority. All right, we're going to dig a little more into the board of directors here. I'll start. So, board of directors nominates or elects a CEO, and then there are CXOs. So the term CXO means the X is fill in the blank. It can be the CTO, the CFO, the CIO, the whatever. And then sometimes there is a lawyer present, counsel. I had the same lawyer the whole 25 years of my engineering company. And she was a lawyer for the company who sat in, she actually ran because I was such a dope. I didn't understand the legalities of how you run a board meeting. She ran our board meetings for like 10 years. She was doing a job that we asked her to join the board. So she was at the second 15 years, the second 10 or 15 years that we were in business. There can be an observer. There can be an advisor. So your board can be made up of voting members and observers or non-voting members. So again, it's one of those things where you can design it to be the most beneficial to you and your organization. Now, this is a debate for another day, but I've always thought, and I did it, I was the president of the company and I was a chairman of the board. So as a chairman of the board, I elected myself to run the company. Isn't that a conflict of interest? Boy, it sure seems like it to me. And nobody ever objected. And it happened all the time. So maybe, I don't know, there's a debate there. Here we go.
Maybe it wasn't a conflict. You own 51% of the stock, so you were representing the shareholders,
Right.
the majority. Hence the number.
That's why I had 51%, so I wouldn't have a conflict. That's right. No. But I mean, in most other circumstances, that would be a conflict, I think. Now, sometimes there are chairs of boards who are executive chairs, an executive chairperson. What's that mean? What I think it means is the executive chairman actually works in the company on a regular basis. That's what that means. Okay. What's the board's role? What's the board there for? I'm getting tired of talking. What's the board there for? Help me out.
Well, at a minimum, they're responsible for making sure the CEO is doing their job.
Yes. But there's a higher level and single role. The board really is only supposed to do one thing, but it's a big thing. They're there to protect the shareholders. That's what the board does. So the shareholders' protection means don't lose their money. So yeah, absolutely, they have to make sure the CEO is doing his job, but they also have to do lots of other things that fit under their primary role, which is protect the interests of the shareholders. Early stage companies typically have 3 members. Until when? Usually it's when they get their first substantial investment and the investors start jockeying for position on their board. So sometimes it'll go to 5. They get $1 million seat and their board may go to 5. Or the founder, who is the chair and the CEO, says, okay, so the investor wants to have a board seat. I don't think I want to get 33% voting power on my board. So I'll go to 5 and only let them. I got to make sure that when something's really important to me that I can get it passed. As you build a board, I think the point is make sure you're filling in expertise that you may not have. Don't visualize yourself walking into a board of directors meeting where everybody's just going to say, yeah, John, cool, thanks, and that's it. You want to have debate. You want to have connections to people that you might not otherwise know. You want to have people who can bring strategic partners, customers, ideas. Here's a really cool way to stimulate innovation across your company. Let's begin to do that. So keep your eye out, keep your mind open to ways to build a board that will really be effective and will really support not only you want to get done, but what you as a person may not otherwise be able to do. Typical management team, usually sketched out by the CEO and approved by the board. Sometimes the board may not require that. Whenever I had a new VP that I wanted to make, I always had the board approve it. I needed them to know about it. I needed to be able to talk it through, especially if we ended up having problems. And you know, at the end of the year, our board of directors, I've been on board and not, this was not found to be a good idea, but our board of directors every year at our annual meeting passed a resolution that said that they are accepting all of the decisions that the CEO made in the company. So there was a sharing of responsibility. Get the board comfortable with doing that as if I was transparent. If I brought them new vice presidents that I hired, if I told them about everything good or bad that was going on.
John, when you own 51% of the company and you're on the board, does your vote carry the board every time?
No.
No, it's still every member has one vote on the board.
Correct. But there are certain matters that require shareholder vote.
Sure.
So change of control, as in, hey, we're going to propose that company XYZ is going to acquire us. That may require shareholders vote.
Great.
Hi, John.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. Correct. Right. Mhm. Right. So back to one of the original points we made is as you're designing this, as you're thinking it through and then ultimately designing it, every one of you is working with a blank sheet of paper. You can design this. I mean, lawyers are going to have to tell you what you could or but you can design this the way it's most beneficial to your shareholders and the company and yourself. Don, push your button.
First question of the day. When it comes to the different powers of the shares, how does that impact their value? Like you mentioned, acquisition.
Depends on the agreement.
Okay.
So in my case, where I had just a simple Class A, Class B, Class A voted on was the board of directors. Who got elected to the board of directors? And there's a Latin term, somebody probably know, but it means that in my case, both shares walked along together. And that means that if there was ever a liquidation, they were both valued exactly the same. Thank you. Yes, perfect. All right. If you're the CEO, you were elected by the board. How do you relate to them? How do you talk to them? What do you talk about? Well, I can't overemphasize enough. I can't emphasize enough the importance of, first of all, making sure that you pick good board members. You don't want to have an awkward relationship with somebody on your board. Pick somebody that you're comfortable with and that you can talk to, and be transparent. Get the board to provide you input on three things: your strategic plan, your operating plan, and your financial plan. Okay? The board needs to understand what your strategy is, and they need to be able to support it in every way. I'm a big believer, maybe you already getting this, I'm a big believer in working my board member. I don't board because they want to have that on their resume or something. Want 'em in the I'm working. So the only way I can do that is to make sure that they understand our strategy, our operations, and where we are financially. I used to communicate with my board members in three categories. I used to send them stuff FYI. Stuff FYI, I told them it was FYI. Not looking for a big discussion here. You don't need to send me anything back. Just want you to know this. Or I'll send them something that says, hey, read this because we're gonna talk about it and ultimately gonna need to make a decision on something. And this will provide you with a good example of what happened in another case or some other relevant factor in that decision-making process. And then the other thing is urgent. I need help right now. I need you on the phone right now. Happened to me. True. I caught my CFO with an account that nobody, and he was putting our client checks into his account. It's like, oh my God, what do I do? Walk him to the front door, John. Take his key. Think several moves ahead. So, and because that's the way the board should think. If we do this, what's going to be the reaction of the market, and what's going to be the reaction of a partner, or what's going to be the reaction of a key employee? If you have it, get it over with fast. Always be eager to solve problems. Be eager to jump into it, especially if your board members want to jump into. So I'm going to quit talking about the board of directors now, but it's really key to know where that responsibility and authority comes from and how that gets discharged by the board to the CEO in the day-to-day operations of the company and how the CEO ought to interact with the board. So if now, instead of looking up to the board, you're looking across your organization, how do you think about building the organization? And one of the things that I encourage is to think about stages. So in terms of funding rounds or grant receipts or technology developments or strategic partnerships, if this happens, then what's the organization look like? What do I need? Who is that person going to report to? What's their responsibility going to be? What's their authority going to be? Okay, so how do I organization? Several basic principles, and you probably all know this from other organizations perhaps that you've worked in, but information flows up, decisions flow down. Very general rule, not a bad one to follow. And one of the more important things is, as a CEO, know where you can get information that you're gonna need to rely on to make a decision. We'll talk about it later, but as a CEO, you better get used to making decisions when you don't have enough information. Match talent and skills to the value of not only their compensation package, perhaps their stock options, but more so where they sit in the organization. Biggest single mistake I made in organizational design and in my engineering company is we had an engineering group. And I got talked into, terribly weak moment, I got talked into biologist taking over as director of the engineering group. It's like, I mean, I got into that about a month later and I thought, what was I thinking? And a major ours, Procter & Gamble, came to me and said, you can't put him on at work. Well, I took him out of his position too. Because it just, I mean, that, I really factor in what a person's education, experience, skill mix, what even their personality, how that fits with what that position that you're talking to them about, you want to put them in, is how that's going to work. Flat organizations like the one on the left, flat organizations are fast. And when I started my company, that's the way we were. And it got to, well, I'll get to that in a second, but it gets big enough, you just can't manage everybody. They're just in, it's not. You need to build a hierarchical kind of an organization. Well, hierarchy does give you some stability because decisions are checked and double checked. You know, approvals on pretty much everything get reviewed by somebody other than you, which can be healthy. But early stage companies, flat. We used to make bid decisions and start work before our competitors even made bid decisions. I mean, we could run circles around the big engineering companies just because they were so hierarchical, they couldn't decide what to do. You know, we need to have the right client manager and the capture manager and the proposal manager all worked into this. And by then, we were already negotiating our contract. So flat is fast. Speed is a strategy. So you can beat your competition by being fast. And the way to be fast is by having a flat organization. As you grow and you begin to start adding a lot of value to the organization through, you know, big orders to customers, then you things will be fun then. John. Right. 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 So 7 plus or minus 2, what is that? That I think is what the ideal number of people in an organization that their superior can effectively manage. So somewhere between 5 and 9. So if you have a group leader and they have 6 people, that's probably the right number. If they start out with 3 and the idea is that that's where you're going to grow, that's where you're going to add people, makes sense. If you 11 people, they're probably not going to have a very good time at work. So 7 plus or minus 2 is kind of the rule on, and who knows? I mean, that can change. It's just the way I used to think about things. Okay, so we have about a half an hour left. What I want to talk about are some thought models. And I consider the business model canvas to be a thought model. And there are some points to it that I want to throw out. If you haven't done the business model canvas, if you haven't done the BM, Look it up. There's some great templates, strategizer. You can read about it online. The point really helps you crystallize the thinking around what are the components that make a business work? How does a business really work? On the right side, because it's most important, and this is the side of your brain that it apparently is where you think about customers. Customer segments, that means what's the total market, what's the addressable market, what's your ideal customer profile, what's all that stuff look like, what kind of relationships are you going to have? And this is going from right to left, which is interesting the way the business model canvas works, but it does. And then in the middle is the value proposition. Now I'm going to talk about values in a minute, and I want to make sure that you don't confuse a value proposition in the business model canvas with what the values are inside. Okay? So value propositions don't mean values, but it's important to understand what your value proposition is and how you think about your early stage company. Key activities, key partners, key resources, all that sort of stuff. Those top boxes, not counting cost structure and revenue, those top boxes go to form your strategic plan. It's the beginning of your strategic plan. Okay? And those are important to work out, but I think as you grow, you'll quickly leave the BMC behind. But it's a great place to start. Cost structure and revenue streams are important to the financial model. They're important to the business model. Right? It's back to innovator, entrepreneur, and founder. That's the middle set of circles. This is a great idea, but can we make money? So those lead to, two bottom boxes lead to your financial model and plans and understanding what your funding requirements are. So if you think about the takeoff here of strategic plans, then what are the cornerstones of your strategic plan? How do I get to a real strategic plan? Okay. Now this is the CEO, you're the CEO, or you're talking to somebody who you want them to be the CEO. And you may have a strategic plan already written. But if I'm interviewing somebody to be a CEO of one of my companies, I want to know that they're a strategic thinker, and I want to know how they think about the strategy of this particular company. Okay? The way I think about a strategic plan, vision, mission, and strategy. Vision is why. And if you all haven't seen Simon Sinek on YouTube, do. S-I-N-E. More than a couple. Really cool talks about the why. And my suggestion to you, understand why and be able to articulate it, be able to live it. Your vision, your why is probably the single most important value that you have. What functional goal? How are we going to grow toward our vision? And then the strategy includes the reasons and goals for positioning the company in chosen markets. The Jack Welch example I gave earlier is, Welch walked in and said, hey, I got a new strategy. We're getting rid of 99% of our businesses. Maybe not 99, but close. All right, if you were to take the vision, mission, and strategy and then break it down one step further so that you can understand it and you can start to develop these ideas and you can begin to build something that is a nice framework for you to be able to put ideas in and see what happens to your business. The system that I learned that gave me the most clarity on that is called the 7 S's. Now, it is absolutely typical of me that I would say, well, 7 S's. It shouldn't be 7 S's. It should only be 6 S's. Because strategy, the first S, and strategy is strategy the other S's. So that's why I drew it this way. So this is the Bruck adaptation of the 7 S's model. McKinsey and Harvard, I'm sure, would take strong exception to my tinkering with their model, but they're not here now. So strategy is the first S. And the other 6 S's, structure, how the company's people and work are organized. Structure is your organization. And what I'm suggesting to you is you need to think about your organization now, and you need to project it into the future so that you can build a thing that's going to work. Systems. This includes manufacturing. So processes and procedures, both formal and informal, that are used to manage the company's people, production, and information. Staffing and skills go hand in hand. What are the skills I need? What are the competencies that I have to actually make my company work? And how do I hire those? I mean, they're going to come in these funny units called human resources, people. What's that look like? The style, the norms that are followed, how employees work and interact with each other. There is a huge question of corporate style right now, and that is remote work. How are we gonna get off Zoom and get back? And what does that look like? I'm glad I'm not a big office building owner. Just be a part of the way we work, the way the economy is. And shared values. Set of principles that inform what is important and guides the behavior of our employees and the company. And as a CEO, not only do you got to understand and live the vision, you got to understand and live the values. Now, we don't have a lot to debate this, but I would like to debate it. But what I'm going to suggest is within this model, shared values is the single most important of all the S's. You got to absolutely get that right. And a lot of people, including me, when I first looked at that, I went, oh, that's like a squishy. How do you articulate your values? Values are the glue that binds stakeholders together. A great CEO understands and lives them. So, for example, we sold engineering, we sold lots of different brands. We had an archaeology group, we had a bio group, field services group. And the single most important feature in all those groups is that whoever I delivered a job was competent. Competence was my number one value. If you don't know your stuff, we can't use you. Okay? It may sound kind of harsh. It's very real because customers aren't going to pay for incompetent people. So back in my engineering day, believed values were so important. I'm emphasizing that because this didn't work very well. I believe that shared values were so important that we print them on the back of our business card and we signed those values. We signed that set of shared values before we handed somebody our card. When you hire us, this is what you get. I'm going to ask you, what's not up there? Technical competence, teamwork, cost effectiveness, ethics, integrity, quality, constant learning, continuous improvement, complete environmentalism. That's another debate we're going to have. Performance-based management, thorough planning and effective implementation, long-term clients and long-term and repeat clients. I'm embarrassed to tell you that what's not up there is diversity and inclusion. That's not very smart. That's not very competent, actually. So, point is, be adaptable. Understand what your values are now and be able to adapt based on what you need to be paying attention to, what you may need to be holding in higher esteem as you go along. And I would suggest that if I had a chance to be in that position today and I could rewrite those values, I'd probably put diversity and inclusion first. John.
Really simple.
Right. 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 Okay. I really want you to understand the difference between management and leadership. And I will tell you that today, I mean, I don't mean like literally right now in this room, but I mean in my life in 2021, I think about what I'm doing and whether it's management or leadership. As a CEO, you're going to skew your time toward leadership. I never wanted to give up management, particularly technical management, because I always wanted to kind of keep my saw sharp. I wanted to be able to be, but you need to also be a leader. And what does that mean? Management deals with complexity. Management is the ability to solve problems. Management is performance-based. You are judged as a manager based on the results that you deliver. Okay? Leadership is inspiration. Ability to get a group of people who would not do on their own. So if I were to name one of the greatest, I was asked, in fact, when you asked this, you got asked the same question in the Inc. Award. Did they ask you who you thought was the most important leader? And you don't get to use any religious leaders.
I do remember that.
Uh-huh. Right. Right. So who did you say was your favorite leader? I said it was Tecumseh. And they said, you're the only guy we've ever heard her say that. Well, I think Tecumseh, because he convinced an entire east half of the United States Indian nation to try and thwart the invasion of Europeans across the Appalachians and Plain States. And he did an absolutely miraculous job. Obviously, he lost, but most people picked Eisenhower. Can you imagine trying to get that group of people to invade France? Good heavens. A group of people would not have done that on their own, right? So leadership is your ability to influence, motivate, and enable others to contribute to organizational success. And the point that I made before, I want to make again, is the real key to organizational development and growth is you don't build managers, you build leaders. So make sure that your leadership style is one where you allow people the opportunity to demonstrate their own abilities as a leader, and you get out of their way. You give them a responsibility, get out of their way. If they make a mistake, this is what I always found hard to do. When they make a mistake, reward it. If they make a mistake twice, same mistake twice, you need to have a meeting. Okay. These are details on management and leadership that you'll see in the deck that you get. But what I want to do is spend the rest of our time, the last 3 minutes of our time, on what are the characteristics of a great CEO. You constantly build value and you manage cash. So when they send you to angel investor orientation, one of the things they teach you is what are your responsibilities as a board member? And it's really simple. I mean, you're responsible for protecting that. Really got to do. Well, you have to get and contribute to, if there's an opportunity, the strategic, operational, and financial plans. You have to be involved in the planning function of the company. You got to support the CEO in the planning function of the company. Okay? Second thing is, never let the company run out of cash. If you need to come back to your home investor organization, help, I need cash. Nobody wants to see an investor, an investment in a company go down the tubes without knowing about it. If they can help, they will. And then third, and this is when investments get pretty high, always keep it. Know what strategic partners you're continuing to develop so that you ultimately be acquired and the investors get liquidated in a very happy X situation. So these are all characteristics of a great CEO. And I don't really care whether it's you or whether it's the person that's across the lunch table that you want to hire as a CEO. There isn't anything on this list that we haven't really talked about. Being able to make decisions in the absence of a full set of information and being able to call a fast audible. So if you're in the process of and new information comes in that will inform a different decision, you have to be able to make that different decision. I can boil the how do you know if you're not the CEO thing down to one point. And that is, are you having fun? Because if you're not having fun, you're probably not the CEO. And I got to tell you, absolutely, days when I was a CEO, I had days when I'd have sold that company for a dime. I'm not kidding. They were tough, but I loved every minute of it. I had fun every day that I was there. And if I had it to do over again, I'd do it in a heartbeat. You will have the time of your life, and hopefully you'll get a valuable payday at the end. So where and how to find a CEO to hire, get your board of directors and advisors to reach out, exercise their networks. Don't take no for an answer. You need to find a CEO and probably have a couple that you can consider. Use your own existing networks and don't feel like, fishing in LinkedIn is a bad idea, because it's not. LinkedIn's got a lot of great people in it. If I were looking for a CEO, I would try to form either the entire board of directors or some subset, maybe a search committee on my board to help me. And I would not want to do the only interviews with a prospective hire myself. I would want somebody else, perhaps a group of people, to interview that person without me being there. Now, having said all the other stuff I said about control, bear in mind, they're going to give you information, but you're going to ultimately make the decision. Okay. Nothing here that we haven't talked about. You'll see it in the deck. I'm not going to take up time going through this right now. Have a blast on your CEO journey. I don't care what direction it takes. Fun with it.